the Truly Devious trilogy. These books are solidly YA in that they feel like books designed for teenagers. There's a lot of teenage drama and questions about what are you gonna do with your life and coming of age kind of things, and that's not a bad thing. I think it was done very well in these books, with the exception of some relationship drama of which we will get into. But in these books, I was way more attached to the plot than I was to the characters, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. Being attached to the plot made me read these books, enjoy these books, they were fun. But it's not like I had big feels over them, because it was just like, oh, whatever, the characters are fine. But these books are definitely mysteries, and it does it fantastically. I've read other books in the YA mystery genre that had way less mystery than these books. These books are overflowing with mystery, and it's done really well. There's the mystery from the 1930s that they're trying to solve in the present day, and also through flashbacks, and the present day mysteries. The balancing of giving us enough information but not too much was really good, because when the big reveals happened, I had always kind of suspected that that was the answer, but I hadn't been sure. It was a very nice balance of giving us enough information so we could have figured it out, but not so much that it was blatantly obvious. And one of the things that I loved about these books is that you can suspect literally, mostly, pretty much every single character of being the evil villain at some point. There are enough clues and little hints about pretty much every single player on the board that at some point you think, wait, maybe they did it. Or maybe they did it. And because of that ambiguity, and because no character really felt 100% trustworthy, because every single interaction between Stevie, the main character detective, and other characters, I was looking for clues. I was thinking, okay, what do they know? What are they going to give away? And that made even the character interactions entertaining because they pertained to the plot, not necessarily because the characters were awesome. But the ending to the mystery, don't worry, this video is only moderate spoilers. I'm not going to spoil something that big. But was the ending satisfying? I'm gonna say, because after so many books of build-up of suspecting every character, when we finally figured out, like, who done it, it was a little bit like, oh, and that is at the end of book 3, when we finally get to figure out all the mysteries, etc. answers. But, can you just read the book 1? I think the endings to books 1 and 2 incredibly unsatisfying if you're just reading books 1 and 2. Because though you do get some little answers to mysteries at the end of those books, you don't really get a satisfying conclusion for either of those. They both end on kind of cliffhangery things. So, I would recommend, if you're reading these books, you have to plan to read all 3. Because they're just not satisfying on their own, which I do think is a failing of each book, that it's not satisfying on its own, but it didn't necessarily detract from my enjoyment of the entire series, because I did read them back to back. Let us talk now about the characters, starting with Stevie. So, does Stevie have a character arc? She kind of gets more confident in her role as detective, and I think she does change, but it doesn't feel like an arc, it feels like a glitch, and I will outline some of these glitches for you. There is one character that I feel like gets worse and worse. I'm looking at you, David, and we will get into David. But Stevie's characterization was inconsistent, especially from like the first third of book 1, and then the rest of the series. Let me give you an example. This is the first page of chapter 1, the introduction to Stevie. "The moose is a lie," Stevie Bell said. Her mother turned to her, looking like she often looked, a bit tired, forced to engage in whatever Stevie was about to say out of parental obligation. "What?" she said. Stevie pointed out the window of the coach. "See that?" Stevie indicated a sign that simply read, "Moose." "We've passed 5 of those. That's a lot of promises. Not one moose." "Stevie, they also promised falling rocks. Where are my falling rocks?" "Stevie, I'm a strong believer in the truth of advertising," Stevie said. What does this tell us about Stevie's character? That she is fastidious and devoted to fact. And when I read this first page, I kind of fell in love with Stevie, because that's a thing that I can kind of relate to. And I started wondering, like, how rich this character could be. She could be on the autistic spectrum, she could have other little quirks. I was excited to further explore this quirky and interesting character. But then the Stevie we see for the rest of the series, I feel like doesn't reflect this first impression very much. Though she is sometimes organized and does care about facts, is she the same kind of person who would care so much about a sign not delivering on its promise? This does become a running joke throughout the book, and it makes me think, like, was this Stevie joking at the beginning? But I feel like it's played straight, as if Stevie really does feel like there should be more moose if they have that many moose signs. And And if you want to buy this wonderful Moose t-shirt, head on down to my store, link in the description. But there's also more to Stevie's character that I feel like changed after the first third of the book. For example, when Stevie and David are starting to get to know each other, so she does the Sherlock Holmesy thing of looking at his tan lines and his watch and the state it's in and all these different things, and pegs him as daddy issues, recently moved to California, and that really strikes home with him. That's another moment when I fell in love with Stevie because she was doing a little detective thing, and that's really entertaining. But then do we see her doing this awesome detective Sherlock Holmesy deduction thing again? Less. Not really. Not to this degree. It felt like Stevie's character made a shift, not necessarily development, just like being less Stevie all of a sudden. And you could argue that this is a good change, because then Stevie isn't the magic detective can figure out anything, she's just like a regular teen who's smart and knows a lot of like CSI facts. But I also would have appreciated seeing more of her applying that in real life, like she did with antagonizing David. And I did appreciate the rich parts of Stevie's character, even though I do feel like we lost some of this richness that was promised from the beginning. But she still has these interesting flaws, such as always jumping to the conclusion that people are mocking her and making fun of her, and that her parents don't have her best interests at heart. Which sometimes is true, but oftentimes I'm like, Stevie, girl, just get some more self-confidence. People just want to be your friend. Which is one of the reasons why she shouldn't be with David. Allow me to elaborate. David is the love interest. In the beginning, they have a little bit of a teasing, bantering, making fun of each other relationship, and then that slowly develops into a romantic boyfriend-girlfriend relationship. David is manipulative, overdramatic, and irresponsible. In book 1, this was almost charming because it was entertaining. But even in book 1, I wasn't hoping that Stevie and David would stay together because I felt like Stevie deserved better, and also David wasn't good for Stevie. So imagine my disappointment when the relationship not only continued, it got worse. Because David just kept getting more and more manipulative and emotionally abusive and not really caring that much about Stevie. It was all about him and his daddy issues. And there's a point, as far as book 3, where Stevie and me suspects David of multiple murders. Now, think about it. If your boyfriend has so many red flags that it is logical to suspect him of multiple murders, kind of seems like a boy who's not boyfriend material. You know what I mean? And I kept hoping through book 3 that this would become Stevie's journey of realizing this is a bad relationship that I am in and this guy isn't a good boyfriend, and then she dumps him. But then, by the end of book 3, they're still together and it's framed as their happy ending, that they're still friends and doing a long-distance relationship. But that's not a happy ending, and I felt like the relationship is really toxic and kind of problematic when it framed it as loving and awesome. But when I was reading these books, because they're so plot-driven, I kept thinking how good of a movie these 3 books would make. I would watch that movie so fast. Yes, please. What did you think of this book? Comment with a detective emoji for our gal, Stevie Bell.